what is the importance of autonomous vehicle technology to California?
Well, I think the autonomous vehicle technology, as well as the connected vehicle technology, as the two converge, is going to create a lot of opportunities for us to more quickly achieve some of the objectives that we have. Certainly the safety objectives, economic objectives, quality of life objectives, and also environmental objectives. So it's a technology that we think can help us achieve those goals more rapidly as we deploy it.
So let's talk specifically about what's going on in California. Where do you see the state right now in terms of leadership with this technology?
So as we develop the regulations in California, we really intend on those being enabling regulations so that we can move forward with the testing of the technology. Certainly in a safe fashion, because we have an obligation to the public to make sure that the testing is being done safely. So I think the most important thing we're doing is working on the regulations to create the rules of engagement, not only for the vehicles, but for the operation of those vehicles so that we can test them safely. And currently in California, there are 36 different companies that have permits to test autonomous vehicles on public roads.
And you mentioned here at your talk at the Autonomous Vehicles Summit, pending ideas for regulation about operations. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about that?
So the most recent version of the operating regulations have been published and are out there for consideration. And one of the biggest updates to those was to allow for completely autonomous vehicles to be tested in California. Prior regulations required a steering wheel and required a brake pedal and a gas pedal and those types of things. But that didn't allow for the development of the completely autonomous shuttles that are out there in lower speed now, but higher speed later on. And the new regulations will allow for the development of that technology as well as the level 3, 4, and 5.
What is sort of the timetable for those regulations?
That is still under determination as far as the timeline. They've been published as a proposed final regulation, but exactly when they'll be finalized really depends on a couple of different factors.
Okay. So you mentioned the 36 companies that are testing, and I believe California has a requirement for any incident to be reported, whether an accident or the driver having to take control. Is that still going to be the case? Is that currently still the case, and what's the value in that?
So at least currently and going forward, we think that that'll continue to be the case. We do want to gather information to be able to ensure the safety of the motoring public. So any incidents, not only accidents, even if somebody rear ends one of these vehicles, we want to be able to know about it. There's also disengagements when the vehicle has to cede control back to the human driver. Why was that? What was the circumstances that required that to happen? What we would ultimately like to get to is everybody who's testing autonomous vehicles. Certainly there is some parochialness going on, but everybody should learn from all the different incidents. If one entity learns something from one incident, it'd be great to have the whole ecosystem learn from that. I think that would be the ultimate goal. Now we understand that these are individual companies. It's not quite an arms race, but it's almost an arms race to move forward. But sharing that knowledge such that everybody is learning from different things is going to be important. But for us, we want to know about the disengagements and all the incidents to, again, also help ensure the safety of the motoring public.
And what about testing in other states? So what kind of mechanism do you have to monitor what they're doing and to report to them what you're doing?
So our Department of Motor Vehicles is the lead on the development of the regulations, and in their collective organization that represents all the Department of Motor Vehicles, they're comparing notes. They're comparing notes on how different states are progressing on the testing of autonomous vehicles, with the differences between the regulations that are being put together by all the states, because there's some variations going on, and that'll be something we'll have to address down the line. Is currently it's under testing, and there's some variation of the different rules of engagement by state. It's going to be important for us to collaborate on what is that model state requirements under, you'll have federal requirements and then state requirements. And OEMs and tech companies are going to want to know, what are the rules of engagement? I can't have different rules for San Francisco that I have for Los Angeles, that I have for Denver, or California and Virginia and Florida and Pennsylvania. How are you going to deal with that? We're already dealing with the parameters, the different parameters and dynamics of driving on different sides of the road with different countries and different signs. It would be a lot more difficult if we were doing it city by city and state by state. So they are comparing notes, and eventually we have to get to kind of a model set of regulations for states, I think.
You also talked about the funding within the state for different infrastructure projects and that it needed to include an aspect of this technology. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that would work?
So our most recent funding package was a pretty robust funding package, and it has a lot of, maintain your roads and maintain your bridges, as well as reduce congestion and also help invest in freight corridors. But one of the requirements was also to maintain ITS elements that are out on the transportation system, the intelligent transportation systems that are out there, because in the past we haven't necessarily recognized the maintenance costs of deploying some of this technology. But it also requires any projects that are funded by the most recent package take into consideration future connected and autonomous technology, so that when we do deploy those projects or deploy that funding into projects, we're taking that into consideration and accommodating that future-looking dynamic of autonomous and connected vehicles.
So at Caltrans, I imagine you have a huge variety of issues on your plate every day. How big a part is this autonomous vehicle sector?
Well, Caltrans and California are very engaged with Silicon Valley and all the different companies that are engaged in California. It's of specific interest to us. I also think that it's going to be a technology solution to a lot of our objectives, our safety objectives, our economic objectives, our mobility objectives. So it's very important to us. We've got a daily grind when it comes to maintaining potholes and maintaining bridges and doing safety projects, but we've got to keep our eye on the horizon as well as to what is tomorrow. Now, I talked about 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, but I gave an example of where we were 20 years ago. Where are we going to be in 20 years from now? And I think the acceleration is only going to pick up of the rollover of technology. So we want to try to keep up with that. I think the states are trying to compare notes as we deploy connected vehicle technology and autonomous vehicle technology. What are going to be the requirements of the transportation system by the autonomous vehicle industry? We all need to try to keep up and learn, and the state DOTs are comparing notes as well. So California, I think we're trying to keep our eyes on the horizon and keep up with it, such that we can achieve the objectives and the benefits from it as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you very much. What are the mobility challenges facing Los Angeles these days?
So I think that, everybody knows that the first thing you think of when I say Los Angeles is traffic or smog, and then maybe the beach or the Kardashians, celebrity. That Los Angeles is a place that is holds a lot of fascination for people. It's a creative capital of the world, but it's also a place that has been sort of crushed by an early reliance on personal and private automobiles to get around, and the infrastructure that went along with that is stunning. I mean, it's an achievement by any stretch, just the sheer amount of freeways and streets and roads that connect places. But it's obvious that that approach of relying on one mode to really improve the mobility of a place like LA County has been a somewhat of a failure, because people are really trapped by traffic. They can't access huge swaths of the city, and even though it's a very dense place, it's the densest metro area in the United States, it's still so large that you still need to leave your neighborhood to get to different things. And so there's been a shift in the last probably 20 years or so, and a realization that the city needs to invest in the build out of a true high capacity transit system. And the voters have voted to tax themselves over and over again to make that investment, which is great, but it's still not enough to give people a full spectrum of choices that they have. I think that the reason why transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft were so successful right off the bat in Los Angeles is because there is a latent hunger for people to want to leave their cars behind, but there wasn't anything to fill in that gap. And so it's sort of a race to catch up, to provide the full spectrum of mobility choices for people and make sure that public transit still serves that kind of core carrying function that it does, because the city is going to keep growing. People are going to continue to come to LA for opportunity, education, family, a whole myriad of reasons, and we need to plan for it. So, the way that transportation functions now in Los Angeles is as a barrier, and we want it to be more of a sort of a connection or a bridge for people to make sure the city can keep growing and make sure it's a welcoming place for everybody.
So what role do you see as automation playing in that transformation?
So automation by itself When you drop it into sort of a traditional travel demand model, it increases the number of trips, it increases long trips, it potentially reignites urban sprawl. There are all these kind of doomsday scenarios that could come of it. But I think that only happens if we allow ourselves to get so hypnotized by the technology that we don't figure out how to have the technology serve the city and not the other way around, right? We made that mistake in the 50s and the 60s. We owe it to ourselves not to repeat that. And the other things that automation really enables is consolidated management of shared fleets, and also tremendous gains in safety. So if we're able to have automation and shared mobility and electrification of the fleet converge and have a real conversation about things like congestion pricing and pricing the efficiency of the trip, then we stand to really make tremendous gains. And in areas that are obvious and not so obvious, clearly reducing congestion gives people back time with their loved ones and their family. But what that does is create more opportunities for social cohesion, resilience, strong neighborhoods, strong cities, those kinds of things. And so if we have the courage to do it right, then the return on that investment is going to surpass, I think, anything that we could even imagine.
Let's talk about the safety aspect of it. What is Vision 2025?
So Vision Zero is something that started in
Vision Zero.
Vision Zero is something that's fine. Started in Sweden in the 90s. This sort of really paradigm shift in the way that we think about the safety of the transportation system. So Vision Zero in Los Angeles is a goal to get to zero traffic deaths by 2025. And it's an ambitious goal, and it's one that I don't think we can achieve without automation. There are sort of limits to where we can get with just redesigning the street. But the key sort of differentiator about Vision Zero is a systems approach to safety. So rather than thinking that we can enforce our way to safety or we can educate our way to safety, we can design our way to safety if we acknowledge the fact that the designs that we put out on the road assume perfect behavior for the best outcomes, that everybody, follows the rules precisely and consistently all the time. And we know that that's just not the case. It's not possible for us as humans. So Vision Zero sort of takes the approach that the system needs to be designed to forgive mistakes. So obviously, when automation comes on board, we don't have that need anymore, but it's a long way from here to when the fleet is fully automated. And in the meantime, the increasing distractions that drivers confront inside the vehicle is going to complicate Vision Zero. So I think in the early years in the transition, it's going to be challenging, but if we can figure out a way to manage through it, the sort of light at the end of the tunnel is that automation could get us to Vision Zero almost immediately.
What are some of the testing facilities that you have in place to help move toward this future?
So in Los Angeles, we put together a sort of a charter agreement with Metro, the County of Los Angeles, the Southern California Association of Governments, which is the municipal planning organization, Caltrans, and the City of LA. To sort of identify what we're calling proving grounds, and also to create a coalition where we can share information and also support each other's efforts to do testing around things like freight automation. So we did a demonstration project recently with the Port of Los Angeles, Metro, and Caltrans with some autonomous trucks. And then we've identified what we're calling proving grounds throughout the county. So the great thing about LA County is that it's so large that it offers, a tremendous variety. So we've identified a closed course in the Palms Airport if you have a product that's sort of about aviation, or if your product needs a fully closed course to do a demonstration. Then we've identified a sort of a pseudo-closed course in the UCLA campus, which offers tremendous opportunities to see if how your software does with lots of unpredictable pedestrian behavior and, slower moving transit vehicles and things like that. An environment at University of Southern California and Exposition Park where we have the ability to create a sort of controlled environment that still sort of includes city streets and parking lots and other things like that, and then a truly open environment around LA's first promise zone. So the promise zone has high numbers of people living in poverty, high immigrant concentration. We really feel like as the city, we want to be an activist investor and drive investment and automation and innovation to those parts of our city that need it the most, where it wouldn't otherwise go. So that's why it was important to us to sort of identify the Promise Zone as one of those proving grounds.
Okay. You've worked both here in San Francisco and obviously in LA. What are some of the differences between mobility planning for those cities? And as you introduce automation, is it something that can be just sort of applied to any city, or do you have to do specific things for each one?
That's a really good question. So San Francisco is, first of all, much smaller. It's 49 square miles. It also has some hard boundaries surrounded by water on 3 sides. And it's got tremendous density, and it's got huge challenges around its affordability and its sort of viability as a city that remains really open to everybody. It's also much more mature in its transit system. So you've got BART, you've got Muni, underground and overground. You've got a lot of transit-only lanes. You've got a lot of protected bikeways. Ford just relaunched bike share. In the Bay Area, you have scooter share here. You have private transit companies like Chariot and Leap. It's really a microcosm of what happens when new mobility and legacy mobility collide. And I think that having worked in San Francisco through tremendous upheaval for the taxi industry and also huge challenges for Muni with the arrival of things like the Google Bus and other private shuttle providers. I think that curb management really rises to the top as a critical issue for cities like San Francisco, where space is really at a premium and there's tremendous demand. It is an asset that the city has to offer, that the city could be pricing, that the city could be inventorying and managing sort of in a digital way. But it also is it's a philosophical battleground as well. And you can see that, the sort of reluctance to share data on the part of the private sector and the somewhat protectionist attitude of the public sector are creating a lot of churn. So both sort of from a public policy perspective and also from just an infrastructure perspective, it is fascinating, and it is probably far further ahead than almost any other American city in sort of seeing what's going to happen when all of this stuff comes together. Los Angeles is a huge canvas. Its scale is just, much, much, much larger. It's obviously much bigger, 4 million people compared to, I think San Francisco has just shy of 1 million. And you have this infrastructure that is fixed, and, it offers an opportunity to think about how could we better manage the infrastructure we have through the arrival and sort of future guiding posture that the city could take around technology and autonomous vehicles, while sort of trying to expedite the build out of the trunk line system. So I think in Los Angeles we have an opportunity because we're sort of just entering this world of learning from cities like San Francisco that are further along, and also in doing a very clear-eyed and level-headed assessment of the assets that we have to offer. So an example is LADOT has about 129 parcels of land throughout the city. Most of them are just surface parking lots. It's a very inefficient use of land. So we could turn that land over to development if we don't need it for parking anymore, or we could look at opportunities to create EV hubs with our parking lots where you have Lyft drivers or Uber drivers who can come use an electric vehicle to provide that service, and could be used by the general public as sort of an EV car sharing hub. you can see how that's sort of a gateway to a shared fleet of autonomous vehicles. So thinking about the assets that we have, whether it's the management of the curb or the management of the land, in LA, I think there are much bigger opportunities for that just because of our size and also because of the way that we've grown.
Okay. Just one more question. So I'm a tourist. 20 years from now, I'm coming to LA. I want to get around. What is the city going to look like for me?
So first of all, I hope you come to LA way sooner than 20 years from now. But 20 years from now, what I hope is that, when you arrive at LAX, first of all, there's a rail connection that you can step onto just seamlessly from the airport. That is a huge infrastructure project that's coming that I think will really revolutionize the way people get around. The idea of renting a car won't even cross your mind because there's so many choices for you that you'll have an app that pushes information to you in your phone about different choices that you have depending on where you want to go, and that as you travel through the city, that app also provides information to you about the places that you're passing through, and that you're able to get off the train, get on an electric bike share bike, roll on a protected bike lane to your to meet up with your friends for dinner, and that robo-taxi comes and picks you up and matches you with 3 other folks and takes you out to a bar later on, and the people that you meet, the social aspect of that ride sharing really sort of opens up the city to you even further, and really has a placemaking quality to it. And that the way that you experience the city is that you don't think about transportation at all, and that it's something that you actually really enjoy because there's been so much thought and care given to making it invisible to you, and that it is an experience that brings you back over and over again.
I look forward to that. I will check it out sooner, see how your progress is going. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Well, San Francisco is home to Lyft and Uber and a lot of the technology companies that are making automated vehicles possible. How does that play out here in San Francisco where you are trying to manage this transportation?
Well, we're proud in San Francisco to be home to both the headquarters of a lot of these emerging mobility service companies, such as Uber and Lyft. We know that we're an important urban laboratory for a lot of those kinds of services. We're also proud of the history of being a visionary city that tries to set a vision of what do we want the future to be, and how can we set government policy and incentives to try and make sure that we get there. So while we understand that there's an important place for all of this experimentation, we want to make sure that all of that work actually promotes San Francisco's values. And so we've been working hard to try and make sure we have a clear idea of what those values are and set up a clear policy framework that these various different companies can work in so that they understand that what we want is we want to achieve safety. We want to achieve our Vision Zero goals of having no pedestrian fatalities, so that they can see we want to achieve our equity goals, that we have goals about we're a transit-first city. It's been a very successful policy for us for several decades. So we want to try and fulfill all those San Francisco values through these new emerging mobility services.
So when you think to the near future and you're planning for mobility, how important do you think automation is going to be to making your goals a reality?
Well, I think we know that automation is coming. And so to a certain extent, there's only a certain extent to which what we want is going to be able to make a tremendous difference. So we know automation is coming. There are going to be autonomous vehicles. And what we as an agency need to do is understand both how to shape that and how to respond to that, how to make the environment work well for San Francisco's residents and people who work here and people who are visiting here. So we're trying to understand how to be able to respond to that.
What would be sort of the biggest impact? I think you had mentioned being able to reclaim parking space for other uses. You mentioned safety. So what's kind of the biggest payoff for a city like San Francisco?
Well, I think with autonomous vehicles, I think a couple of the potential benefits include the safety is probably the first thing that people think of. We had 30 people die on San Francisco city streets last year, and that happened the year before. We know that automation can help with safety. We know that automated vehicles can be safer than human drivers. We need to make sure that they get there and that they will in fact be safer, that they fulfill that promise. But that's, I think, one of the promises of automated vehicles. Another is reclaiming urban spaces, being able to have a more successful urban land use environment. If we are able to have a situation where we need fewer vehicles overall to make the city work, to get people around from point A to point B, then we will have a lot of parking spaces that will go unused, and we can use them for much better things. And San Francisco has already been doing some terrific things along that front. We've been doing a better job of putting the right price on our parking spaces. We've also been doing a good job of turning some of those parking spaces into, from parking spaces into parks, having little parklets, having cafe seating, or we've put a variety of different things into places that used to be parking spaces. It's one of the things that we've done to be doing making the streets safer. What's called daylighting, removing a space or two next to an intersection so that both vehicles and pedestrians can see, and bicyclists and everybody else using the street can see around corners, can make sure to be able to interact more safely. But being able to reclaim some of that, the large amounts of land that have been given over to vehicle space over the years, that's certainly a potential benefit as well.
In your presentation, you talked about the development of Treasure Island, which would seem to, like, you probably don't have that opportunity come along every day to be able to do something like that. And you said you're doing a pilot program for automated vehicles as part of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So San Francisco was one of the cities that applied for the federal Smart Cities grants. And although we didn't get the big prize, we did get one of the later grants that came along for that. And we'll be using part of the funds for that to support an autonomous shuttle, an intra-island shuttle on Treasure Island. Treasure Island's the island in the middle of the bay. It's actually two islands, Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island. So Treasure Island's the island in the middle of the bay, in the middle of the Bay Bridge. It's the one that you stop down on as you cross the bay. And it's a former naval base, and when it was decommissioned, there was a process to decide what should we do with it next. And the result of that was a proposed redevelopment that will take us from the current situation where we've got a couple of thousand people and a lot of old, kind of fallen apart buildings, and turn it into a new development that will have up to 25,000 new residents, almost 500,000 square feet of office and retail space, a hotel, a conference center. We tried for the George Lucas Museum, didn't get that. So I think it will be a new neighborhood for San Francisco, and that's definitely a significant opportunity to figure out how can we make sure that we have really sustainable modes of transportation for everybody living on, working on, and visiting the island. So our agency is charged with being the Treasure Island Mobility Management Agency, and as such, our job is to make sure that the traffic from that new development doesn't clog up that Bay Bridge. 25,000 new people, if they all drive to get everywhere, we're going to break the bridge. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So one of the elements of that mobility management effort is an autonomous vehicle shuttle that'll be running an intra-island shuttle. So that shuttle, we're going to try and do a few things. We will definitely be testing the hardware and the interaction of hardware and software to make sure it all works in the fog. We've got a flat island of Treasure Island, and then Yerba Buena Island is very hilly, so we've got both different types of terrain, tight corners. It'll be a challenging physical environment for the automated vehicles to work in, and that'll be important testing. We also think that as important, perhaps even more important element of that testing is integrating the autonomous shuttle into all of the mobility services on the island. So we'll be integrating along with ferries, buses on and off the island, car share, bike share, the ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft, jitney services. I don't know, there may be electric skateboard rentals, who knows what we're going to end up with. What we think we really need to do is integrate all of those different mobility services under a comprehensive mobility as a service app that allows people to plan, pay for, and get information about all these different mobility services in the same place. And having that kind of integrated system is key to making sure that we can deliver the incentives that are needed to help move the transportation on the island towards San Francisco's goals, trying to make sure that we'll have the mode share that we want, that we have people getting on and off the island without driving their own vehicles, or hopefully without too many of them having to be in individual passenger cars. So as part of that, we have a transit pass that will have unique benefits for Treasure Island travelers. We'll have an affordability program. Something that was very important to the city was making sure that not only would there be a good number of homes people can afford on the island, but also that the transportation would be affordable as well. So we're going to be putting all of those systems together and having an automated shuttle as part of that to ferry people around the island will be an important part of that.
Will that be sort of a good preview of what a visitor to San Francisco might experience, say in 10 or 15 years, sort of the panoply of options that they can easily choose to get around?
That's definitely, yes. In a word, yes. There's, I think we're definitely seeing Treasure Island as a place to make sure that we can make these different systems work together. A lot of those kinds of services already exist in San Francisco's mainland, and trying to make them work well together is one of the things that we're trying to do on Treasure Island. We want to use that as a place, particularly because it is a place where new development is happening, so people will be moving in knowing that they will have the experience of having a toll to get on and off the island, that they will get a transit pass as part of their rental agreement or as part of their condo association, whether they're renting or own their own place. So there are people will be coming in with those assumptions, starting from the ground up, and so it'll be a good opportunity to test what things work well there and hopefully work out some of the kinks on them to make sure they work well before they go to work in San Francisco's mainland. That said, there's a lot of innovation already happening in San Francisco, and We just had the bike share system open a couple weeks ago here in San Francisco. Just earlier this week, it opened in the East Bay and expanded in San Francisco. And we've already got several companies looking at dockless bike sharing, electric bike sharing, or e-bikes. There's a lot of different services. You've got, it's more than a dozen companies are testing autonomous vehicles on San Francisco streets right now, registered with the California DMV. So there's a lot already happening, and one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we understand enough of how that's working that we can try and make sure it works well for San Francisco's goals.
Thank you very much.